Late July into August is the point in the season where hostas quietly decide how they're going to come back next year. Most people treat this stretch like any other summer week. Water when it's dry, maybe toss on some fertilizer, move on with life. But the plant is doing something different underground right now. It's building the energy reserves in its crown and roots that determine next spring's growth. Whatever happens above the soil in the next few weeks either feeds that process or drains it. And that's exactly where most gardeners go wrong, because the habits that worked fine in June start working against the plant once summer heat sets in. Hostas are perennials, which means the leaves you see this year are temporary, but the crown underneath is permanent, and it carries the plant's history of good or bad care from one season into the next. A hosta that gets stressed in August doesn't usually show it until the following spring, when it comes up smaller, later, or thinner than it should. That delay is exactly why so many gardeners never connect the dots between what they did in late summer and what they see months later. If you're planning on keeping your hostas full and healthy year after year, it's worth sticking around for the rest of this, because a couple of these steps are easy to miss and can cost you a full growing season if you skip them. Subscribing helps if you want more of these plant care breakdowns as the seasons change. Now let's get into what your hostas actually need right now. Hostas look tropical, so people assume they want constant moisture, and they water on a schedule instead of watching the soil. That's a problem in August specifically, because the combination of heat and shallow, frequent watering encourages fungal issues right at the crown, where the leaves meet the roots. Hostas actually want deep, infrequent watering, roughly 1 to 1.5 inches a week, delivered slowly, ideally through drip irrigation or a soaker hose rather than overhead sprinklers. Wetting the foliage repeatedly in hot weather is one of the fastest ways to invite crown rot and leaf spot diseases, and once those set in, they're much harder to reverse than to prevent. If you're watering by hand, aim at the base of the plant, water in the morning so foliage has time to dry, and check the soil 2 inches down before you decide it needs more. A hosta sitting in soggy soil during a heat wave is under more stress than one that's slightly dry, because wet roots in warm soil struggle to take up oxygen, and that's when root rot organisms get their opening. Container-grown hostas need extra attention here, since pots dry out faster than garden beds and heat up more from direct sun on the container walls. If you're growing hostas in pots, check them daily during hot stretches, and consider moving containers to a spot with afternoon shade if they're wilting by early evening, even after a morning watering. Wilting that disappears once temperatures drop in the evening is usually just heat stress, not a sign the plant needs more water. Pushing extra water onto a plant that's simply reacting to afternoon heat is one of the more common overcorrections gardeners make. Fertilizer feels like a helpful thing to add before a big growth push, but for hostas, timing matters more than the fertilizer itself. Most fertilizer schedules for hostas are built around spring, when new growth is emerging and the plant can use nitrogen to build leaves. By late summer, the plant is shifting its priorities toward storing energy for winter dormancy, rather than pushing out new foliage. A dose of high nitrogen fertilizer in August encourages soft, late-season leaf growth that hasn't had time to harden off before the first frost hits, and that tender growth is more vulnerable to cold damage and disease. If you feel like your hostas need a boost this late in the season, a light application of a balanced, slow-release fertilizer is far safer than anything nitrogen-heavy, and for most established plantings, skipping fertilizer entirely after mid-July is the better call. Save the feeding for early spring, right as new shoots, often called pips, start to break through the soil. It also helps to remember that hostas are naturally light feeders compared to a lot of garden perennials. A single application of compost worked into the soil in spring is often enough for the whole year, and gardeners who fertilize heavily throughout the season tend to end up with larger leaves that are more prone to splitting, more attractive to slugs, and more susceptible to sun scald if the plant is in a spot that gets more light than the variety can handle. A lot of gardeners assume spring is the only time to divide hostas, and while spring division is common, late summer through early fall is actually one of the better windows, provided you do it early enough that roots can re-establish before the ground freezes. If you're planning to divide clumps this year, aim to get it done by late August in most temperate climates, giving the divisions 6 to 8 weeks to grow new roots before winter. Dig up the entire clump, gently work the root mass apart by hand or with a clean, sharp knife, making sure each division has a good section of roots and at least a few eyes or growth points. Replant immediately at the same depth they were growing before. Water thoroughly, and keep the soil consistently moist for the first few weeks while the new roots establish. Dividing too late in the season, especially after early September in colder zones, leaves the divisions without enough time to anchor themselves, and they're more likely to heave out of the ground during freeze-thaw cycles in winter. It's also worth picking an overcast day or late afternoon to do the actual digging, since direct midday sun on freshly exposed roots adds unnecessary stress right when the plant is most vulnerable. If a clump looks like it's thinning in the center with most of the healthy growth pushed to the outer edges, that's usually a sign it's overdue for division regardless of the calendar, since overcrowded roots compete for the same nutrients and water. Chapter 6. Slug damage peaks right now. If your hosta leaves are riddled with ragged holes, slugs and snails are almost always the cause, and their activity often peaks in the humid stretches of late summer. They feed at night and hide during the day, in mulch, under leaves, or in dense ground cover, which is why the damage seems to appear overnight with no visible culprit. Hand picking at dusk with a flashlight is genuinely one of the most effective controls, especially for smaller plantings, because it removes the pests directly instead of just repelling them. Shallow dishes of beer set at soil level work as a trap, since slugs are drawn to the yeast and drown in it. Diatomaceous earth or crushed eggshells around the base of the plant can create a barrier they're reluctant to cross, though both need to be reapplied after rain. Iron phosphate slug bait is a safer option than older metaldehyde-based baits, particularly if you have pets or wildlife in the yard, since it breaks down into compounds that are far less toxic. Whatever method you use, staying consistent through August matters more than any single treatment, because slug populations can rebuild quickly if you let up. Clearing away dense debris near the base of the plant, thinning out overly crowded ground cover nearby, and watering in the morning instead of the evening all help too, since a drier surface at night gives slugs less reason to linger around the plant. There's a specific hosta problem that's easy to miss because it looks like ordinary leaf discoloration at first: foliar nematodes. These microscopic worms live inside the leaf tissue and cause narrow brown or yellow streaks that run between the leaf veins, usually showing up in mid to late summer when temperatures and humidity are high. Unlike fungal leaf spot, which tends to be round and can appear anywhere on the leaf, nematode damage follows the vein pattern because the parasites are physically trapped between them. There's no effective chemical treatment available to home gardeners once a plant is infected, and the nematodes survive in fallen leaf debris and can spread through splashing water or even on garden tools. If you spot this pattern, the recommended approach is to remove and destroy the affected leaves, or the entire plant if the infestation is severe. Avoid overhead watering on nearby hostas, and disinfect any tools that touch the infected plant before using them elsewhere. Catching it in August, while damage is still visible and before the plant goes dormant, gives you the best chance to limit its spread to the rest of your bed next season. Never compost infected leaves, since the nematodes can survive the composting process and end up spread right back into your garden through the finished compost. Bagging and disposing of infected material and household trash is the safer route. As August moves along, it's worth starting to think about mulch, but the goal shifts slightly from moisture retention to preparing the root zone for the transition into cooler weather. A 2 to 3 inch layer of shredded bark or leaf mulch keeps soil temperatures more stable, suppresses weeds competing for water, and reduces the splashback that spreads soil-borne fungal spores onto lower leaves. Keep the mulch pulled a couple of inches back from the crown itself, since piling it directly against the base traps moisture right where rot is most likely to start. This is also a good time to clear out any fully yellowed or collapsed leaves at the base of the plant, since decaying foliage sitting against the crown in humid weather is an easy entry point for disease. You don't need to cut back healthy green leaves. Hostas are still photosynthesizing and building energy reserves right up until frost, so removing green foliage early actually works against the plant rather than tidying it up. If you're in a region with harsh winters, this is also a reasonable time to make a note of which hostas struggled most with heat or sun exposure this summer, so you can plan a fall or spring move to a better spot rather than watching the same problem repeat next year. If there's one thing worth taking away from all of this, it's that hostas in August are in a different phase of their yearly cycle than they were in May, and treating them the same way through the whole season is where most of the trouble starts. Deep, infrequent watering at the soil line instead of frequent overhead watering. No nitrogen-heavy fertilizer after midsummer. Dividing early enough that new roots have time to settle before the ground cools. Nightly slug patrols instead of a one-time treatment. A close look at any streaky leaf discoloration before assuming it's ordinary leaf spot. And mulch that protects the crown without smothering it. None of this is complicated, but each piece plays into how strong your hostas come back next spring, and skipping even one of them is usually where gardeners end up disappointed by a thin, patchy clump the following year instead of the full, healthy mound they were expecting. A little attention in these few weeks is a small price for a bed that keeps filling out year after year instead of quietly losing ground.